My daughter's husband thought I was sleeping. He thought I was just a fragile old man dreaming of the past. He opened my drawer to get the keys to the safe, his hands trembling with greed. But when he looked inside, he went numb. What he saw was not a fortune to steal, but a mirror reflecting his own ruin. And I was wide awake to watch it happen. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who smiled in your face while holding a knife to your back, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. It was exactly 2:14 in the morning when the third floorboard from the bedroom door screamed. It was not a loud scream. To an ordinary person, it would have been nothing more than the house settling against the winter chill or the wind pressing against the siding. But I am not an ordinary person. My name is Elijah Jefferson, and I am 69 years old. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer listening to the groan of steel and the whisper of concrete under millions of tons of pressure. I know the difference between a building settling and a predator entering my territory. I did not move. I did not open my eyes. I kept my breathing rhythm perfectly even, in hold for 2 seconds out. It was a technique I learned not in the military, but in the high-pressure chambers of underwater tunnel construction in the late 80s. Panic burns oxygen. Calm preserves it. And right now, I needed every ounce of oxygen to fuel my rage. The intruder moved closer. I could smell him now. It was a mixture of stale bourbon sweat and that cloying, desperate scent of cheap designer cologne that Blake wore to pretend he was successful. Blake Henderson, my son-in-law. The man who had married my daughter Keisha 5 years ago with a smile that showed too many teeth. He stopped at the foot of my bed. I could feel his gaze on me. It was heavy, wet, and full of malice. I lay on my side, facing away from the door, my right hand tucked under my pillow. To him, it looked like the sleeping posture of a tired old retiree. He did not know that my fingers were wrapped around the cold-textured aluminum handle of a heavy-duty box cutter. The blade was retracted, but my thumb was resting on the slider, ready to push it forward in a fraction of a second. I am an old man. Yes, my knees ache when it rains, and my back is not what it was when I was lifting I-beams in Chicago. But my hands are still strong. And if he touched me, if he tried to put a pillow over my face, I would open his throat before he could take a second breath. The floor creaked again. He was moving toward the nightstand on the left side of the bed. Good. He was not here for murder. Not tonight. He was here for the money. Or what he thought was the money. I listened to the soft friction of fabric against wood. He was wearing his robe. He probably thought he was being clever, slipping out of the guest room while Keisha slept, thinking her father was just a senile obstacle in his house. He reached for the top drawer of my nightstand. I had greased those runners with silicone spray 3 days ago, just so they would slide silently. I wanted him to feel confident. I wanted him to feel safe. He opened the drawer. I heard the soft shuffle of papers. He was pushing aside my blood pressure medication and the Bible I kept there for show. He was looking for the keys. Blake believed I was a hoarder. He believed the rumors he had started himself that I kept thousands of dollars in cash locked in a small, fireproof safe in the closet because I did not trust banks. He told Keisha that I was paranoid. He told her that my mind was slipping, that I was forgetting where I put things. He found the keys. I heard the distinct jingle of metal on metal, instantly silenced as he closed his fist around them. It was a ring of 3 keys. They felt heavy. They felt real. They felt like the answer to his $200,000 gambling debt. He did not know that those keys belonged to a storage unit in Detroit that had been demolished 12 years ago. He stood there for a moment, breathing hard. His breath hitched in his throat, a sound of excitement and fear. Then he whispered. It was barely a breath, but in the silence of the night it sounded like a shout. Stupid old monkey. The slur hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was not the first time I had felt his racism. I had seen it in the way he spoke down to me when he explained simple concepts, assuming a black man from my generation could not understand compound interest or market fluctuations. I had seen it in the way he rolled his eyes when I told stories about my work, assuming I had been a laborer, not the chief engineer. But hearing it spoken aloud in the sanctity of my own bedroom while he tried to rob me flipped a switch inside my chest. The fear vanished. The hesitation vanished. All that remained was a cold geometric calculation of how I was going to dismantle this man's life. I would not just stop him. I would take him apart piece by piece, like a faulty structure that needed to be condemned. Blake turned away from the nightstand and crept toward the closet. I waited. I needed him to try the safe. I needed him to realize that the keys did not work. I needed him to feel that spike of frustration. He reached the closet door. He opened it slowly. I had left the safe visible sitting on the floor behind a row of my old flannel shirts. It looked impressive. Heavy black steel digital keypad and a keyhole override. I heard the metallic scratch of the key trying to enter the lock. It would not fit. The key was a quick-set house key profile. The safe required a tubular barrel key. A smart man would have checked the keys before walking across the room. Blake was not a smart man. He was a desperate man. He tried again. Scratch, scrape, then a soft curse. Damn it, damn it. He tried the second key, then the third. Nothing. He kicked the safe. A dull thud. Then he came back toward the bed. My grip on the box cutter tightened. My thumb put pressure on the slider. If he came within striking distance, I would have to act. I prepared myself to spring up. I visualized the trajectory. Upturn slash. But he stopped at the foot of the bed again. "You are not going to live much longer, Elijah," he whispered into the darkness. "And when you die, I am going to take it all. Every single dime. I am going to burn this house down and piss on the ashes." He kicked the leg of the bed frame. It was a petty, childish act of violence. The bed shook slightly. I let out a snore, a perfectly timed, rhythmic snore that I had practiced. Blake froze. He waited to see if I had woken up. When I continued the rhythm, he let out a sigh of relief. He turned and left the room, closing the door with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. I lay there for another 10 minutes. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall. I listened to the door of the master bedroom open and close. I listened until the house was silent again. Only then did I open my eyes. I did not feel sleepy. I sat up and swung my legs over the side of the bed. My joints popped a reminder of my age, but my mind was sharp. I reached under the mattress near the headboard and pulled out a small disposable burner phone. It was an old Nokia model, the kind with buttons that clicked. I kept it charged and hidden for emergencies. This was an emergency. I did not turn on the lamp. I typed in the dark, my thumbs moving over the keys from muscle memory. I was texting Sarah Jenkins, the only lawyer in this city who knew exactly how much I was worth and exactly what I was capable of. He took the bait I typed. Phase 1 is complete. He is desperate. Start the background check on his associates. I want to know who owns his debt. I sent the message and watched the small screen glow for a moment before fading back to black. Blake thought he was the predator in this house. He thought he was living with a helpless, senile old man who was losing his grip on reality. He thought he could steal my dignity, my history, and my legacy. He was wrong. I stood up and walked to the window. The streetlights cast long orange shadows across the lawn. This was my house. I bought it with the money I earned, designing the foundation for the city municipal center. I paid for every brick. I planted the oak tree in the front yard. Blake wanted to burn it down. He wanted to take everything I touched, the cold glass of the window. Tomorrow the game would change. Tomorrow I would stop being the victim. I went back to the nightstand and picked up the glass of water sitting there. I took a sip. He had called me a stupid old monkey. I smiled in the darkness. It was a cold, humorless expression. "Let us see how smart you are, Blake, when the walls start closing in." I lay back down, but I did not put the box cutter away. I slid it back under the pillow. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I began to build a plan in my head, layer by layer, beam by beam. I was an engineer. I knew how to build things that lasted. And more importantly, I knew exactly where to place the explosives to bring a structure down in a controlled demolition. Blake Henderson was about to collapse, and I was going to be the one to push the plunger. The next morning, the sun came up just like it always did, indifferent to the treachery that had walked through my halls in the dark. I could hear the sounds of the morning routine starting. The coffee machine gurgling in the kitchen, the shower running, the television murmuring the morning news. I dressed slowly. I put on my old cardigan, the one with the frayed cuffs that Keisha always told me to throw away. I put on my glasses even though I didn't really need them for distance. They made me look softer. They made me look harmless. I walked out into the hallway and headed for the kitchen. Blake was there, standing by the stove, flipping pancakes. He was wearing an apron that said Grill Master. He was humming a tune. When he saw me, his face lit up with a smile that was so bright, so fake, it almost hurt to look at. "Good morning, Dad," he chirped. "Did you sleep well?" I shuffled toward the table, letting my feet drag slightly on the floor. I sat down and looked at him. "I had strange dreams," I said, my voice raspy with morning phlegm. I dreamt there was a rat in my room, a big white rat. Blake's smile didn't falter, but his eyes twitched, just for a second. Dreams can be weird, Elijah, he said, pouring me a cup of coffee. Here, drink this. It will help you wake up. I looked at the coffee. It was black, just the way I liked it. But I didn't reach for it. Keisha walked in then. My daughter. She looked tired. She worked double shifts as a nurse to cover the bills that Blake couldn't pay with his failing real estate gigs. She kissed my cheek. Morning, Daddy, she said. Where's your watch? I looked at my wrist. It was bare. My watch, I asked, feigning confusion. The gold Hamilton watch that Beatrice, my late wife, had given me for our 25th anniversary. I never took it off. Except for last night. I took it off last night, I said. I put it on the nightstand. Blake turned around from the stove, a spatula in his hand. No, you didn't, Dad, he said, his voice dripping with condescending patience. You lost it yesterday. Remember? We looked everywhere for it. You left it at the park when you were feeding the birds. I looked at him. He was rewriting reality. He was gaslighting me in front of my own daughter. I didn't go to the park yesterday, I said. Blake sighed and looked at Keisha. See, he whispered loud enough for me to hear. It's getting worse, babe. He doesn't even remember where he was yesterday. Keisha looked at me, worry creasing her forehead. Daddy, are you sure Blake said you were really upset about losing it? I looked at my daughter. I saw the doubt in her eyes. I saw the exhaustion. She wanted to believe her husband because the alternative was too painful. She wanted to believe that her father was just getting old, not that her husband was a liar. I looked back at Blake. He was watching me with a predatory satisfaction. He thought he had won this round. He thought he was in control. I decided to let him have this small victory. It would make his fall that much harder. Maybe you are right, I muttered, looking down at my empty plate. My memory, it is not what it used to be. Blake walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and hot. Don't worry, Dad, he said. We'll take care of you. In fact, I have a friend who is a doctor, a specialist in memory loss. I think we should take you to see him today, just for a checkup. I knew exactly what that meant. He wasn't taking me to a doctor to help me. He was taking me to get a diagnosis. He was taking me to get the first piece of paper he needed to have me declared incompetent. I looked up at him. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I let my eyes go a little unfocused. A doctor, I asked weakly. Is he a good doctor? The best, Blake said, grinning. He'll know exactly what to do with you. Okay, I said. Let's go. Blake looked surprised. He had expected a fight. He had expected the stubborn old man. My compliance threw him off balance. Great, he said. Eat your pancakes. We leave in an hour. I picked up my fork. I cut a piece of the pancake. I put it in my mouth. It tasted like cardboard and betrayal. I chewed slowly. You want to take me to a doctor, Blake, I thought. Fine. Let's go to the doctor. But you are not going to like the second opinion. I swallowed the food. I took a sip of the coffee. The war had moved from the shadows into the light, and Blake Henderson had no idea that he was marching his prisoner not to a cell but to a command center. I finished my breakfast, wiped my mouth with a napkin, and stood up. I'll go get my coat, I said. I walked back to my room. I closed the door. I went to the closet, reached into the back of my sock drawer, and pulled out the small digital recorder I had bought 3 months ago. I slipped it into my pocket and turned it on. From this moment forward, everything Blake said, every lie, every threat, every manipulation would be recorded. I looked at the empty spot on the nightstand where my keys had been. You want to play games with my memory, son? I whispered to the empty room. Let's see how good your memory is when you are under oath. I opened the door and walked out to meet my executioner, ready to let him lead me straight to the trap I had built for him. The smell of burnt bacon grease hung heavy in the kitchen air, coating the back of my throat like a layer of dishonesty. It was 7 a.m. The sun was trying to push through the gray clouds outside the window, casting a dull, flat light over the breakfast table. I sat in my usual chair, the wood hard against my spine, watching the man who had tried to rob me just 5 hours ago playing the role of the devoted son-in-law. Blake stood at the stove, humming a tune that sounded vaguely like a commercial jingle. He flipped eggs with a performance of cheerfulness that was almost nauseating. He was wearing a fresh shirt, his hair gelled back, his face scrubbed clean of the sweat and desperation I had smelled on him in the dark. He looked like a man without a care in the world, a man who believed he had gotten away with it. He turned and slid a plate in front of me. The eggs were rubbery, the edges laced with brown, and the bacon was charred strips of carbon. "Eat up, Elijah," he said, his voice booming with false conviviality. "You need your strength." I looked at the food. I did not pick up my fork. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms, a spatula dangling from one hand like a weapon. "You know," he said, tilting his head as if studying a specimen. "I heard you last night." I raised my eyes to meet his. He was smiling, but his eyes were flat, dead things. "Oh," I said. My voice was steady. It did not tremble. "Yeah," he continued, glancing at the doorway to ensure my daughter was not yet in earshot. "You were up around 2, bumping into walls, opening drawers. I think you were sleepwalking again. It is getting worse, old man. I was worried you were going to hurt yourself, or start a fire." He was rewriting reality in real time. He was taking his own intrusion, his own violation of my privacy, and twisting it into a symptom of my decline. He was planting the seeds of incompetence, watering them with lies. I did not deny it. Denying it would make me sound defensive. It would make me sound like a confused old man arguing with a concerned younger relative. That was exactly what he wanted. "Maybe," I said, taking a sip of the black coffee. It was bitter. "Dreams can be heavy things." He chuckled a dry sound. "Yeah, well, try to stay in bed tonight. We do not want you wandering out the front door." I heard the soft padding of feet on the hallway carpet. Keisha entered the kitchen. My daughter looked exhausted. The circles under her eyes were dark bruises of fatigue. She worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital to pay for the lifestyle Blake pretended he could afford. She kissed my cheek. Her lips were cool. "Morning, Daddy," she murmured. "Morning, baby girl," I said. She went to the coffee pot, pouring herself a mug with trembling hands. She took a sip and then frowned, looking down at her wrist. Then she patted her chest. Then she turned to the counter, moving a stack of mail. Panic began to rise in her movements, sharp, jagged movements. "Where is it?" she whispered. "What is it, babe?" Blake asked, pushing off the counter to play the hero. "Mama's watch," she said, her voice pitching up. "The gold one. I had it right here. I put it on the counter last night when I did the dishes." She began to move things frantically. The toaster, the fruit bowl, the stack of unpaid bills that Blake hid under the magazines. "It is gone," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "It is gone." Blake walked over to her and wrapped his arms around her. He looked over her shoulder at me. His expression was one of exaggerated pity. "Honey," he said softly, "Elijah was in here last night. Remember I told you? He was sleepwalking. He was moving things around." Keisha froze. She pulled away from him and looked at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and accusation. "Daddy," she asked, "did you take Mama's watch?" I sat perfectly still. The watch was not lost. It was not stolen. It was sitting in safety deposit box number 404 at the First National Bank downtown. I had moved it there 3 days ago because I knew Blake had been eyeing it. I knew he had priced it online. I knew he intended to pawn it to cover the interest on his loan. But Keisha did not know that. Keisha only knew that her husband was telling her that her senile father had lost the last piece of her mother she had left. I looked at my daughter. I saw the heartbreak cracking her face. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to reach out and say, "It is safe. I am protecting it from him." But I could not. If I told her I moved it, Blake would know I was lucid. He would know I was 5 steps ahead. He would panic, and a panicked man is a dangerous man. I had to let her doubt me. I had to let her heart break a little now so I could save her life later. "I do not have the watch," I said quietly. Blake sighed. It was a loud, theatrical exhale. "He probably flushed it," Blake said, shaking his head. "Or threw it in the trash. I saw him near the bins last night. He was confused, Keisha. He did not know where he was." Keisha covered her mouth with her hand. A sob escaped her throat. "Oh God, Daddy, how could you?" I stared at my coffee cup. The black liquid reflected my face. I looked old. I looked tired. It was a good mask. Inside I was burning with a cold white rage. I etched this moment into my mind. I would make him pay for every tear she shed. Blake steered Keisha to a chair. He rubbed her back. "See?" he whispered loud enough for me to hear. "It is the memory. It is going fast. First the keys, now the watch. What if he leaves the gas on next time? What if he hurts you?" Keisha looked at me. The trust was gone, replaced by fear. replaced by the realization that her father was no longer a parent, but a liability. "We have to do something," Blake said. "We cannot keep ignoring this. It is irresponsible." "What can we do?" Keisha asked, wiping her eyes. "I have a friend," Blake said quickly. Too quickly. "Dr. Vance. He is a specialist in geriatric cognitive decline. He owes me a favor. I can get Elijah in today, just for an assessment, just to see how bad it is." He looked at me then, a challenge in his eyes. He expected me to fight. He expected the stubborn, proud black man to refuse help, to yell, to cause a scene. That would be the final nail in my coffin. It would prove I was irrational. Dr. Vance. I knew the name. He wasn't a specialist. He was a pill mill doctor who operated out of a strip mall clinic on the South Side. He was the kind of doctor who signed prescriptions for cash and asked no questions. Blake thought he was sending a lamb to the slaughter. I slowly buttered a piece of toast. The knife scraped against the bread. Scratch. Scratch. I took a bite. I chewed. I swallowed. Then I looked up. I made my eyes wide. I made my hands tremble just a little. "A doctor?" I asked. "Yes," Elijah Blake said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A doctor, to help you remember things, so you do not lose any more of Keisha's jewelry." He thought he had me cornered. He thought I was a frightened animal. "Okay," I said. Blake blinked. The smirk faltered for a microsecond. "Okay," he repeated. "Yes," I said. I stood up, leaning heavily on the table as if my legs were weak. "If I am sick, I should see a doctor. Let us go." I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. It was the first crack in his confidence. He had prepared for a battle, and I had just surrendered. He did not know that you only open the gates of the fortress when you want the enemy to march into the kill zone. "Good," he stammered. "Good. That is sensible." He checked his watch. The Rolex that he had bought with the second mortgage he took out on my house without asking. "We can go now," he said. "Get your coat." I walked to the hallway closet. I put on my coat. I patted the pocket to ensure the digital recorder was still there, humming silently, capturing every lie. I looked at Keisha. She was still sitting at the table, her head in her hands. "I will bring the watch back, baby girl," I thought. "And I will bring you back your life too." I opened the front door. The morning air was cold and smelled of rain. "After you," Blake said. I walked out to his car. It was a leased BMW that smelled of leather and pretension. I got into the passenger seat. Blake got in the driver's side. He started the engine. He looked at me and smiled. It was the smile of a man who thinks he has won the lottery. "Ready?" he asked. I looked straight ahead at the gray road. "I was born ready, son," I said. He laughed. He thought I was joking. He put the car in gear, and we drove away from the house I had built, heading toward the doctor who was going to certify my demise. Blake turned up the radio. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. He was happy. He did not know that he was driving the getaway car for his own funeral. The waiting room of Dr. Vance's clinic smelled of bleach and old magazines. The fluorescent lights hummed with a dying flicker that would have driven a lesser man insane. I sat on a vinyl chair that was cracked down the middle, watching Blake tap furiously on his phone. He was likely texting Keisha, telling her that the process was moving smoothly, or perhaps he was messaging his bookie, promising that the payout was imminent. Dr. Vance called us back 10 minutes late. He was a sweaty man with a stain on his tie and eyes that darted around the room like trapped flies. He did not look like a specialist. He looked like a man who had lost his medical ethics in a poker game years ago. Blake guided me into the office, his hand gripping my elbow a little too tight. "Sit here, Elijah," he said, pushing me into a chair. "Dr. Vance is going to ask you some simple questions." Vance sat behind his desk, shuffling a stack of forms. He did not look at me. He looked at Blake. "Is this the patient?" Vance asked. "Yes," Blake said. "He is confused. He wanders at night. He forgets names. We are very worried about his capacity to make decisions." Vance nodded, clicking his pen. He finally looked at me. His gaze was dismissive. He saw an old black man in a fraying cardigan and assumed there was nothing behind the eyes. "Mr. Jefferson," Vance said, speaking slowly and loudly. "Can you tell me what year it is?" I looked at him. I looked at the diploma on the wall. It was from a university that had lost its accreditation 3 years ago. "It is the year 2024, I said calmly. Vance frowned. He expected me to say 1980. "Good," he said, sounding disappointed. "Can you count backward from 100 by sevens? 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58, 51, 44, 37, 30, 23, 16, 9, 2. I rattled the numbers off faster than he could write them down. Blake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He has lucid moments, Blake interrupted quickly. That is part of the problem. It comes and goes. Vance nodded. Of course. Fluctuating cognition, very common in early-stage dementia. Vance leaned forward. Mr. Jefferson, do you ever hear voices? Do you ever feel like people are stealing from you? I looked at Blake. He was smirking. This was the setup. If I said yes, I was paranoid. If I said no, I was in denial. I do not hear voices, I said. But I do hear the structural fatigue in this building. Vance blinked. Excuse me. I pointed to the ceiling corner above his head. That hairline fracture in the drywall. I said, my voice dropping its senile act and taking on the cold, hard edge of a site foreman. It is running at a 45-degree angle from the load-bearing beam. That indicates a differential settlement in the foundation. Judging by the vibration from the HVAC unit on the roof, which I can feel through the floor soles, the shear stress on that lintel is approaching critical failure. Vance looked up at the crack terrified. And looking at the water stains, I continued, you have a slow leak in the plumbing chase that is rotting the joists. This building is not up to code, doctor. And neither is your diagnosis. Blake stood up, his face red. Dad, stop it. You are talking nonsense. See, he obsesses over things that are not real. I stood up too. I moved closer to the desk. I placed my hands on the wood and leaned in. If you sign a paper saying I am incompetent, Dr. Vance, I will report this building to the city inspectors tomorrow. I will walk them through every violation in this room, and then I will have the medical board review your prescribing history. Vance turned pale. He looked at Blake. You did not tell me he was like this. He is crazy, Blake stammered. He used to work construction. He is just remembering old jargon. Get him out of here, Vance hissed. I am not signing anything. I cannot lose my license for this. Blake grabbed my arm. We are leaving. He dragged me out of the office, furious. He did not understand what had just happened. He thought I was having a manic episode. He did not realize I had just outflanked him. We walked back into the lobby. Blake was shaking with rage. You embarrassed me, he whispered harshly. You stupid old man. I looked at him, letting my face go slack again. I need to use the restroom, I mumbled. My stomach hurts. Blake rolled his eyes. Go. Hurry up. I have to make a call. He pointed to a door down the hall. I shuffled toward it, looking frail and confused. Blake turned his back, pulling out his phone to call Keisha and spin some new lie about my behavior. As soon as I turned the corner, the shuffle vanished. I moved with purpose. I did not go to the restroom. I went to the rear emergency exit. I pushed the bar. The alarm should have sounded, but I had noticed the wiring was cut when we walked in. Another code violation. I stepped out into the alley. The cold air hit my face. I walked fast, putting distance between myself and the clinic. I cut through a parking lot and emerged onto the main avenue. I raised my hand. A yellow cab swerved to the curb. Where to, the driver asked. South side, I said. 45th and Martin. And step on it. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. That is a rough neighborhood, Pops. You sure? I am. Sure, I said. We drove away, leaving Blake Henderson standing in a lobby waiting for a ghost. He would search the bathroom. He would search the street. He would panic. Let him panic. Panic makes people make mistakes. The city landscape changed as we drove south. The manicured lawns of the suburbs gave way to industrial parks, then to rows of brick tenements. This was where I grew up. This was where I learned that steel does not bend unless you apply heat. We stopped in front of a nondescript brick building with bars on the windows. A sign above the door read Jenkins and Associates. It looked like a hole in the wall. It was actually the most secure legal fortress in the city. I paid the driver and went inside. The receptionist, a large woman named Brenda, looked up and smiled. Mr. Jefferson, she said. Sarah is expecting you. I walked into the back office. Sarah Jenkins was sitting behind a desk covered in files. She was 40 sharp as a razor, and the only person who knew the full extent of my assets. She stood up and shook my hand. You look like you are ready for a war, Elijah, she said. I am, I replied. Did you get the file? She nodded and handed me a thick manila folder. It is all here, she said. But before we look at that, we need to talk about the patent royalties. The quarterly statement came in this morning. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. I glanced at it. $450,000. It was the payout from the stress-resistant concrete formula I had developed 20 years ago. It was used in every bridge and skyscraper foundation in the tri-state area. Blake thought I was a retired laborer with a pension. He did not know he was trying to rob an inventor whose mind was worth more than his entire life. "File that away," I said. "I do not care about the money right now. I care about the debt." Sarah opened the folder she had prepared. Blake Henderson, she read. Failed real estate license. 3 failed businesses. And a serious gambling problem. She pulled out a sheet of paper with a photo clipped to it. "He owes $200,000 to a loan shark named Vinny the Butcher Santoro," Sarah said. "Vinny operates out of a warehouse district in the West End. The debt is past due. Vinny has given him 30 days to pay or he starts breaking legs." I looked at the photo of Blake. He looked younger, arrogant. He had no idea the shark was already circling. 30 days, I mused. That explains the rush. That explains the nursing home. He needs to liquidate my house to pay Vinny. Exactly, Sarah said. If he does not get your assets, he is a dead man walking. I sat back in the leather chair. I thought about my daughter. I thought about the betrayal. I thought about the man who had called me a monkey in my own bedroom. "I do not want him dead," I said quietly. "That is too easy. Death is an escape. I want him to suffer. I want him to feel the walls closing in until he cannot breathe." "What do you want to do?" Sarah asked. I pointed to the file. "Who holds the paper on that debt?" I asked. "Technically, Vinny does," Sarah said. "But Vinny answers to a syndicate. They sell bad debt all the time to clean their books." "Buy it," I said. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You want to pay off his gambling debt?" "No," I said, my voice cold. "I do not want to pay it off. I want to buy the note. I want to become the holder of the debt. I want to be the one he owes." Sarah smiled. It was a dangerous smile. "You want to become his loan shark?" "Yes," I said. "Use the shell company, the one we set up for the anonymous donations. Approach Vinny's people. Offer them 50 cents on the dollar for the paper. They will take it to get quick cash." "And then," Sarah asked. "And then," I said, standing up, "you transfer the rights to me. Personally." I walked to the window and looked out at the street. Blake Henderson thinks he is playing a game of chess with a pawn. He does not know the pawn just bought the board. "Do it today, Sarah," I said. "Consider it done," she replied. I checked my burner phone. 5 missed calls from Blake. He was terrified. "Good. I am going back home," I said. Sarah looked concerned. "Is it safe?" "No," I said. "But it is not safe for him either." I left the office and stepped back out into the cold. I had the weapon I needed. Blake owed money to a monster. He just didn't know that the monster was coming home for dinner. I walked through the front door, and the silence hit me harder than the cold wind outside. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a courtroom right before the verdict is read. The air in the living room was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. Blake was sitting on the sofa, his legs crossed, his arms spread out along the backrest as if he owned the furniture, the house, and the very air we were breathing. Keisha was sitting next to him, her posture hunched, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked small. She looked defeated. But it was the coffee table that drew my attention. It was covered in glossy trifold brochures. They were bright yellow and green with stock photos of smiling elderly people playing chess and looking out at artificial gardens. Sunny Meadows Senior Living. I knew the place. It was a converted motel on the edge of the industrial district, sandwiched between a tire dump and a liquor store. It was the kind of place where people went to be forgotten. It was the kind of place where the smell of urine was masked by cheap pine cleaner. I closed the door behind me, and the sound of the latch clicking shut made Keisha jump. "Hello, Dad," Blake said. His voice was smooth, practiced. It lacked the jagged edge of fear I had heard last night. He had regained his confidence. He had a plan. I did not answer. I walked slowly into the room, my eyes scanning the brochures. "We need to talk, Elijah." Blake continued, gesturing to the empty armchair opposite them. "Please, sit down." I remained standing. I was not a guest in my own home. I was the owner. I was the foundation. "What is this?" I asked, pointing a calloused finger at the colorful paper lies on the table. "It is time to be realistic, Dad," Blake said, leaning forward, his face twisted into a mask of deep, pained concern. We are worried about you. Today was a tipping point. You disappeared for hours. You did not answer your phone. And then there was the incident this morning. I looked at Keisha. She was refusing to meet my eyes. She was staring at her knuckles, which were white from gripping her own hands. What incident? I asked calmly. Don't play dumb, Dad. Blake said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The stove. He let the words hang there. I came home after dropping you off at the clinic. Blake lied, his eyes locked on mine. The house smelled like gas. The rear burner was on, just hissing. No flame. The kitchen was filling up. Another 10 minutes, Elijah, just 10 minutes, and a spark from the refrigerator compressor would have blown this entire house into orbit. He turned to Keisha and took her hand. Keisha was asleep, he said to her, squeezing her hand. If I hadn't come back to check on things, if I hadn't found it. He let the sentence trail off, allowing the horror of the fabrication to fill the room. Keisha finally looked up at me. Her eyes were swimming with tears. The fear in them was real. She believed him. She believed her father had almost killed her in her sleep. Daddy, she choked out. Is it true? I looked at my daughter. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I had checked the stove 3 times before I left. I wanted to tell her that her husband was a monster who would burn the world down to light his cigarette. But I saw the way she clung to him. She was terrified. If I denied it, I would just be the confused old man denying his mistake. I did not leave the stove on, I said firmly. Blake shook his head sadly. See, he does not even remember doing it. That is the scary part, Keisha. He does not know. He is a danger to himself, and he is a danger to you. He picked up one of the brochures and held it out to me. Sunny Meadows is a great facility, Dad, Blake said. We made some calls today while you were wandering the streets. They have a room opening up tomorrow. It is safe. They have 24-hour supervision. You won't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or managing medications. Keisha stood up then. She walked over to me and took my hands. Her palms were sweating. Daddy, please, she begged. I cannot sleep at night. I am terrified that something is going to happen. I love you so much, but I cannot take care of you like this. I cannot watch you deteriorate. Her voice broke. Blake says it is the best place in the city, she sobbed. He says they will take good care of you. It is only $3,000 a month. We can use your pension. We can sell the house to cover the rest. It is the only way. There it was. The end game. Sell the house. Liquidate the asset. Pay the loan shark. I looked at Blake over Keisha's shoulder. He was trying to hide a smirk. He thought he had checkmated me. He thought he had used my daughter's love as a weapon to force my surrender. I gently pulled my hands away from Keisha. I stepped back. I needed space. I needed to breathe. You want me to go to Sunny Meadows? I said, my voice flat. It is for the best, Elijah, Blake said. For everyone. I reached out and took the brochure from Blake's hand. I looked at the picture of the smiling nurse. Then I looked at Blake. Sunny Meadows, I repeated. Yes, Blake said. We can drive you over tomorrow to sign the papers. I tossed the brochure back onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and fell onto the floor. I am not going anywhere, I said. Blake's face hardened. Dad, you do not have a choice. This is a safety issue. If you do not go voluntarily, we will have to get a court order. We will have to declare you incompetent. For your own good. I laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh that startled them both. For my own good, I said. You want to put me in Sunny Meadows for my own good. I took a step toward Blake. He flinched. Did you read the news today, Blake? I asked. Or were you too busy meeting with your forger friend, Blake? Blinked. What, Sunny Meadows? I said, my voice raising in volume, filling the room with the resonance of a man who used to shout orders over jackhammers. That facility was raided by the DEA 3 days ago. The director was arrested for trafficking fentanyl. They were sedating the patients to keep them quiet and selling their pain medication on the street. Half the staff is in jail. The state is revoking their license next week. I pointed a finger at his chest. Is that where you want to send me, son, to a drug den, to a place where they tie old men to beds and steal their pills? Is that your idea of safety? Keisha gasped. She turned to Blake. Is that true? Blake stammered. His face turned a blotchy red. No. I did not know. It looked nice on the website. You did not look at the website, I said, cutting him off. You looked at the price tag. You looked for the cheapest hole you could find so you could pocket the difference when you sell my home. Daddy, Keisha said, reaching for me again. No, Keisha, I said, stepping back. Your husband wants to put me in a facility that abuses its patients. He did not do his research, or maybe he did and he just did not care. I looked at Blake. The smirk was gone. In its place was the raw, ugly look of a cornered rat. I am going to my room, I said, and I am locking the door. If anyone tries to enter, if anyone tries to touch me, I will call the police. And I will not be reporting a fire. I will be reporting elder abuse. I turned my back on them. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. I heard Keisha crying. I heard Blake whispering angry, frantic excuses. I went into my bedroom and closed the door. I turned the heavy brass deadbolt I had installed myself 10 years ago. Click. I was safe for tonight, but the war had barely begun. Blake had tried to bury me. He did not realize he was just digging his own grave deeper. I took out my phone and sent a text to Sarah. He tried the nursing home play. He failed. Proceed to phase 2. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for the next attack. I was ready. The house had become a silo of pressurized silence for the past 7 days. Since the confrontation about the nursing home, Blake and I had been circling each other like two wolves trapped in a cage that was too small. He did not speak to me. He spoke at me. He spoke through me. He performed for Keisha, playing the role of the stressed but dutiful son-in-law, while his eyes tracked my every movement with a cold reptilian patience. I knew he was desperate. My lawyer Sarah had confirmed that Vinny the Butcher had sold Blake's debt to my shell company, but Blake did not know that yet. All he knew was that his 30-day deadline was bleeding away day by day, and the old man who stood between him and his inheritance refused to die. It was a Tuesday night. The air in the hallway was stagnant and heavy. I woke up at midnight with a dryness in my throat that felt like dust. I needed water. I sat up in bed, my joints popping in the quiet room. I put on my slippers. I did not turn on the lamp. I knew this house better than I knew the lines on my own face. I knew that it took 12 steps to reach the door and another 8 to reach the top of the staircase. I walked into the hallway. The moonlight was streaming through the high window, casting long, pale rectangles on the floorboards. The house was asleep, or at least it should have been. I reached the top of the stairs. My hand went automatically to the handrail. It was a beautiful piece of mahogany that I had installed 15 years ago. But underneath the wood was a core of reinforced steel that I had anchored directly into the structural studs with 3-inch lag bolts. I had built it to support 500 pounds of dynamic load because I knew that one day my legs might fail me. I never imagined that it would be the only thing keeping me from a broken neck. I stopped. My foot hovered over the first step. Something was wrong. The moonlight was reflecting off the wood in a way that defied physics. Wood absorbs light. It does not shimmer. It does not glisten like the surface of a wet road. I knelt down my knees, complaining against the hard floor. I reached out a finger and touched the tread of the top step. It was wet. It was viscous. I rubbed the substance between my thumb and forefinger. It was thick and slick. I brought it to my nose. It smelled fruity and green. Oil, cooking oil, poured carefully across the top 3 steps. I looked down the staircase. It was a long, steep drop to the hardwood floor of the foyer. If a 70-year-old man lost his footing here, gravity would do the rest. A fractured hip, a spinal injury, a brain bleed. It was a simple, brutal trap. It was the kind of accident that happens every day. The police would call it a tragedy. The insurance company would pay out. And Blake would have the house. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. He was trying to kill me. He wasn't just trying to put me away anymore. He had escalated to active measures. I could have stepped back. I could have gone back to my room. I could have wiped it up. But that would only delay him. That would only make him try something else, something I might not see coming. I needed to shock him. I needed to let him know that his traps were child's play to a man who had built skyscrapers. I stood up. I gripped the handrail. My fingers wrapped around the wood, feeling the steel heart beneath it. I tightened my grip until my knuckles turned white. I tested the friction. It was solid. I was going to give him what he wanted. I was going to give him a show. I took a deep breath. I positioned my body. I shifted my weight to my left leg, the strong one. Then I stepped onto the oil with my right foot. I let myself slip. It was a terrifying sensation, the loss of friction, the sudden acceleration of my heels sliding forward into nothingness. My body lurched over the edge of the step. Gravity grabbed me by the chest and pulled. but my hand did not let go. I swung out into the void suspended by my right arm. My shoulder screamed in protest, the muscles tearing slightly under the strain, but the anchor held. The bolts held. The steel held. I swung my legs back and kicked the riser of the stairs hard. Thud. I kicked the wall with my other foot. Bang! Then I let out a cry. It was not a scream of fear. It was a theatrical, strangled yelp of a man plunging to his doom. Ah! I let my body drop to the landing, controlling the fall, so that I landed on my side, rolling to dissipate the impact. I slapped the floor hard with my hand to create the sound of a body hitting wood. Then I lay still. I sprawled my limbs out. I turned my face away from the light. The silence that followed was heavy. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Then came the sound I was waiting for. A door was thrown open upstairs. Footsteps pounded across the hallway. They were fast. They were heavy. They were not the footsteps of a man waking up from a deep sleep to investigate a noise. They were the footsteps of a man running to check a trap he had set. Blake appeared at the top of the stairs. He was wearing his boxers and a t-shirt. He was breathing hard. He looked down into the gloom of the foyer. "Dad!" he shouted. His voice was laced with a panic that sounded almost genuine, but underneath it I heard the sharp high note of excitement. He ran down the stairs, skipping the oiled steps with a practiced ease. He knew exactly where the danger was. He knew exactly where to step. He reached the bottom and fell to his knees beside me. He hovered over me, his hands fluttering but not touching. He was afraid to touch the dead. "Dad, oh my God. Dad, can you hear me?" I lay perfectly still. I kept my eyes closed. I felt his breath on my face. He leaned closer. He was checking for breathing. "Yes," he whispered. It was a single word, a hiss of victory, a confirmation of his intent. He stood up. I heard him fumbling with his phone. He was going to call 911. He was going to play the grieving son. I decided the show was over. I groaned. It was a low, guttural sound. Blake froze. "Dad." I opened my eyes. I blinked slowly as if coming out of a daze. I pushed myself up into a sitting position. I did not wince. I did not hold my back. I moved with the fluid mechanical grace of a machine resetting itself. Blake stared at me. His mouth hung open. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "You fell," he stammered. "I heard you fall. You fell down the whole flight." I stood up. I brushed the dust from my pajama pants. I rolled my shoulder, testing the joint. It was sore but functional. I looked at him. I looked up the stairs at the glistening sheen on the top step. I stepped closer to him. He smelled of sweat and fear. "I slipped," I said calmly. "Yes," Blake said, nodding frantically. "You slipped. It is these old socks. The floor is slippery. You should not be walking around in the dark. I told you. I told you it was dangerous." I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. I squeezed. Not a comforting squeeze. A vice grip. My fingers dug into his trapezius muscle. I leaned in until my lips were inches from his ear. "Extra virgin olive oil," I whispered. Blake went rigid under my hand. "I know the smell." I continued, my voice a low rumble. "That is the imported brand Keisha buys for salads. It costs $20 a bottle, Blake. You poured half of it on the floor." I pulled back and looked him in the eye. "That is wasteful, son. You are wasting money you do not have." The color drained from his face. The panic vanished, replaced by a cold, hard realization. He realized that I had not fallen. He realized that I had swung from the rail like an acrobat. He realized that I knew. He took a step back, shaking my hand off his shoulder. "I do not know what you are talking about," he said. His voice was flat. "Dangerous." "I think you do," I said. I walked past him toward the kitchen. I stopped in the doorway and turned back. "Clean it up, Blake," I said, "before Keisha wakes up and slips. We would not want an actual accident, would we?" I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. I drank it in one long gulp. When I walked back to the hallway, Blake was on his hands and knees on the top step, scrubbing furiously with a rag. He looked up at me as I passed. The look in his eyes had changed. The condescension was gone. The fake concern was gone. There was only hatred. Pure, unadulterated hatred. He was no longer looking at a senile old man he could push around. He was looking at an adversary. He was looking at a target that refused to go down. He realized then that this wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about survival. I went into my room and locked the door. I sat on the bed and let out a long, shaky breath. My shoulder throbbed. I had survived the fall, but the ground had shifted. The rules of engagement had changed. Blake knew that I knew. And a man like Blake, a man who owes money to butchers, a man who greases stairs in the middle of the night, does not stop when he is caught. He escalates. I checked my phone. A text from Sarah. The paperwork is ready. You officially own the debt tomorrow morning. I smiled in the dark. Clean your stairs, Blake, I thought. Because tomorrow I am going to pull the rug out from under your entire life. The smell of roasting beef did little to mask the stench of desperation that permeated the house on Friday evening. Blake was running around the living room like a manic stage director, adjusting cushions, dimming lights, and screaming in a hushed whisper at my daughter Keisha to make sure the wine glasses were polished to a diamond shine. He was sweating through his shirt before the guest had even arrived. I was standing in the kitchen watching the chaos with a detached curiosity. Blake marched in carrying a bundle of fabric that smelled of mildew and mothballs. He threw it at my chest. Put these on, he commanded. I unfolded the bundle. It was a pair of stained canvas overalls and a faded plaid shirt that looked like it had been used to clean an oil spill. They were not my clothes. They belonged to the previous gardener who had retired 5 years ago. Why, I asked simply, because tonight you are not my father-in-law. Blake hissed, his eyes darting to the window. Tonight you are the help. You are the old handyman we keep around out of charity. You do not sit at the table. You pour the wine. You clear the plates. And you do not speak unless someone asks you a direct question. Do you understand? I looked at the rags in my hands. It was a calculated humiliation. He wanted to strip me of my status in my own home. He wanted to show his guests that he was the master of the house, and I was just a piece of furniture that needed dusting. Who is coming to dinner, Blake? I asked. An investor, he said quickly. A very important man who is interested in the property portfolio. He likes to see that a house is well maintained. So you are going to look like you maintain it. Now get changed. I went to the pantry and changed. As I buttoned the rough flannel shirt, I felt a strange sense of calm. Blake thought he was demoting me. He did not realize he was giving me the perfect camouflage. The invisible servant hears everything. The invisible servant sees everything. And sometimes the invisible servant drops poison in the cup. I knew exactly who was coming. Sarah had sent me the file. Vincent Vinny Santoro. He was not an investor. He was a loan shark who operated out of a meatpacking plant in the industrial district. He was the man who held Blake's $200,000 debt. He was coming to appraise the collateral. He was coming to see if the house was worth seizing. I walked back into the kitchen. Blake looked me up and down and nodded. Perfect, he said. You look pathetic. Just try not to drool. The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, demanding sound. Blake jumped. He smoothed his hair, took a deep breath, and put on his salesman's smile. It was a smile that looked like it was painted on glass. Showtime, he whispered to himself. He went to the door. I stayed in the shadows of the dining room archway. Vinny Santoro walked in. He was a small man, compact and dense like a bulldog. He wore a suit that cost more than Blake's car, but he wore it uncomfortably like armor. His eyes were small dark beads that scanned the room, pricing everything in sight. Nice place, Vinny grunted. Thank you, Mr. Santoro, Blake said, bowing slightly. Please come in. This is my wife, Keisha. Keisha smiled nervously. She thought this was a business meeting. She did not know she was shaking hands with a man who broke fingers for a living. Nice to meet you, she said. Vinny nodded at her, dismissing her instantly. He looked at the walls. He looked at the floor. He stomped his heel on the hardwood. Solid, Vinny said. Solid as a rock. Blake agreed eagerly. Built in the 80s. Custom construction. They do not make them like this anymore. They sat at the dining table. I emerged from the kitchen carrying the wine bottle. It was a vintage Cabernet from my own cellar, a bottle I had been saving for my 70th birthday. Blake had stolen it to impress a thug. I moved around the table pouring the wine. My hand shook slightly, part of the act. Who is this? Vinny asked, looking at me with distaste. Oh, that is just Elijah, Blake said dismissively. He used to be the gardener. He is a bit senile now, but we let him stay in the guest room. He likes to feel useful. Vinny grunted. He took a sip of the wine. Good wine, he said. The best, Blake said. So Vinny said, cutting straight to the chase. You say the equity in this place covers the investment opportunity we discussed. Absolutely, Blake said, leaning forward. This house appraised for $600,000 last year. The market in this neighborhood is exploding. It is a gold mine. You take the deed as security and you are practically printing money. Vinny looked around the room again. He was calculating. He was a predator looking for weakness. 600, huh? Vinny asked. Any issues? Roof plumbing? Blake laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. Nothing, Blake said. Pristine condition. I handle all the maintenance myself. I was standing behind Vinny holding the wine bottle. I stepped forward to refill his glass. As I poured, I let the bottle clink against the rim. Oops, I muttered. Sorry, sir. My hands. The vibrations. Vinny looked at me. What vibrations? I looked at Blake. His eyes were wide with warning. I looked back at Vinny. I let my jaw slacken. I let my eyes go unfocused. The vibrations from the subgrade, I mumbled. You can feel them when the trucks go by on the highway. It is the liquefaction. Vinny frowned. The what? Blake stood up halfway. Elijah, go to the kitchen. I ignored him. I spoke to the wine glass. The soil composition here is silty clay, I said, my voice taking on a monotonous, rhythmic cadence. When I poured the footings in '82, we had to use helical piers because of the high water table. But the hydrostatic pressure has been increasing for 10 years. You can see the differential settlement in the north corner. The foundation slab has a 3-inch variance. Vinny turned in his chair to look at me. He was listening. He was a man who dealt in assets. He understood risk. What does that mean, old-timer? Vinny asked. I looked him in the eye. For a second, the senile gardener vanished. The chief engineer appeared. It means the house is sinking, I said clearly. The tensile stress on the load-bearing walls is exceeding the shear capacity. You can see the hairline fractures behind the wallpaper. Blake covered them up with spackle last week, but the structural integrity is compromised. And the wiring. I shook my head sadly. Aluminum wiring from the late 70s update, I lied smoothly. It was never replaced. It is a fire hazard. The insulation is degrading. To bring this building up to code, you would need to lift the entire structure, re-pour the foundation, and strip the walls to the studs. Conservative estimate $150,000 in repairs, minimum. The silence in the room was absolute. Keisha looked confused. She had never heard me use words like hydrostatic pressure. Blake looked like he was having a stroke. His face was purple. Vinny looked at Blake. The look was not friendly. You told me it was pristine, Vinny said softly. It is, Blake shouted. He is crazy. He is senile. He does not know what he is talking about. He thinks he is an engineer. Vinny stood up. He picked up his napkin and threw it on the table. He sounds pretty specific for a senile gardener, Vinny said. Helical piers, hydrostatic pressure. That does not sound like crazy talk to me. That sounds like a man who knows this pile of bricks is a money pit. Vinny walked over to the wall. He ran his hand along the wallpaper. He found a small bump where Blake had indeed patched a hole from a door handle accident a month ago. Patched up, Vinny muttered. Just like he said. Vinny turned to Blake. His voice dropped an octave. It became a low rumble of violence. You tried to sell me a Lemon Henderson. You tried to hand me a sinking ship as collateral for my money. No, Vinny, please, Blake stammered, backing away. It is worth the money, I promise. Vinny walked to the door. He stopped and turned back. The deal is off, Vinny said. I do not want this house. It is a liability. He pointed a thick finger at Blake. You have 3 days, Blake. 3 days to come up with the 200 grand, cash. If you don't, I am not coming for the house. I am coming for you. And I start with the thumbs. He looked at me. He nodded respectfully. Thanks for the tip, Pops. Enjoy your wine. Vinny walked out. The front door slammed shut. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with a violence that was about to explode. Keisha was trembling. Blake, she whispered, what is going on? Who was that? $200,000? Blake ignored her. He turned to me. His eyes were wild. He was hyperventilating. His plan had collapsed. His safety net was gone. He was a dead man walking, and he knew exactly who had pushed him off the ledge. You, he whispered. He took a step toward me. Then another. He picked up a steak knife from the table. You did that on purpose, he screamed. You ruined everything. You old bastard. He lunged. Keisha screamed. Daddy. I did not move. I did not flinch. I reached into the pocket of the dirty overalls and pulled out my phone. The screen was glowing bright in the dim room. I held it up. Blake stopped 3 feet away from me, the knife raised his chest, heaving. "Look at the screen, Blake," I said calmly. He looked. His eyes focused on the 3 numbers displayed in green. 911. My thumb was hovering over the call button. "Hit me," I said. "Go ahead. Stab me." The call connects the second my thumb touches the glass. "The police are 3 minutes away. Do you want to add attempted murder to your debts? Do you want Vinny to find you in a jail cell?" Blake froze. The knife wavered in his hand. He looked at the phone. He looked at me. He saw the cold calculation in my eyes. He realized that the senile gardener had just outmaneuvered him again. He lowered the knife. He dropped it onto the table. It clattered loudly against the china. "Get out of my sight," he hissed. "Go to your room." I did not move immediately. I looked at Keisha. She was staring at her husband with horror. She was seeing the stranger beneath the skin. "I am going to my room," I said, "because I am tired, not because you told me to." I walked past him. I did not hurry. I walked with the dignity of a man who owns the ground he stands on. I entered my room and locked the door. I sat on the bed and listened. I heard Keisha crying. I heard Blake throwing things, breaking glasses, screaming into the void. He had 3 days. 3 days before Vinny came back. 3 days before his world ended. I took out the burner phone. I texted Sarah. "Phase 2 complete. The shark has smelled the blood. He is yours now." I lay back on the pillow. I was exhausted, but I felt a grim satisfaction. Blake wanted to play games with my life. He wanted to gamble with my legacy. Well, I had just raised the stakes. And now he was holding a losing hand against the house. And the house always wins. The morning sun did not bring warmth to my house that Saturday. It only brought a stark, revealing light that highlighted the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air and the dark circles under my daughter's eyes. It was 8 in the morning, and the deadline Vinny the butcher had given Blake was ticking down like a bomb in the basement. I was sitting in my usual spot at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. I was waiting. I knew the attack was coming. Blake had tried to certify me insane and failed. He had tried to kill me on the stairs and failed. He had tried to sell the house to a shark and failed. Now he was desperate. And a desperate man always reaches for the weapon closest to him. In this case, the weapon was Keisha. I heard them arguing in the bedroom down the hall. It was not a loud argument. It was a hiss of urgent, terrified whispers. Then silence. Then the sound of a door opening. Keisha walked into the kitchen. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 days. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her hands were shaking as she gripped a sheaf of papers against her chest. Blake followed close behind her, his shadow falling over her like a prison bar. He was vibrating with a manic energy, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He had not slept. Keisha pulled out a chair and sat next to me. She placed the papers on the table. She smoothed them out with trembling fingers. "Daddy," she said, her voice cracking. "We need to talk." I looked at her gentle face. I saw the manipulation etched into every line of worry. Blake had broken her down. He had likely told her that without this we would lose everything. He had terrified her into compliance. "What is it, baby girl?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and confused. "It is just some paperwork, Daddy," she said, tears spilling over her lashes. "It is for insurance, for the house, and for your medical care. Blake says the insurance company needs to update their files because of your age." She could not look me in the eye. She knew deep down that this was wrong, but she trusted her husband more than she trusted her gut. Blake stepped forward. He put a hand on Keisha's shoulder, squeezing it. It was a gesture that looked like comfort but was actually control. "It is standard procedure," Elijah Blake said. His voice was tight like a wire about to snap. "Just a formality. It gives us the ability to talk to the insurance agents for you, so you do not have to worry about the details." I looked at the document. It was not an insurance form. It was a durable power of attorney. It was a document that would give Blake Henderson total unrestricted control over every asset I owned, my bank accounts, my pension, my house, my life. If I signed this, he could sell the house today. He could drain my accounts tomorrow. He could pay Vinny and leave me destitute in the street. I reached out and touched the paper. My hand shook. I made sure it shook. "I do not understand," I mumbled. "I have insurance." Beatrice handled the insurance. Beatrice is gone, Dad, Blake snapped. Then he caught himself. He softened his tone, but the venom was still there. Mom is gone. We have to take care of it now. Please, just sign it so we can stop worrying. Keisha took my hand. Her palm was clammy. Please, Daddy, she sobbed. Blake says if we do not do this today, they might cancel your coverage. What if you get sick? What if you fall again? We cannot afford the hospital bills without insurance. He had terrified her with the prospect of my own suffering. He was using her love for me to destroy me. It was a masterful evil stroke. I looked at Blake. He was staring at the pen sitting on the table. He was willing me to pick it up. He was sweating. I could smell the fear coming off him in waves. He needed this. This was his last Hail Mary pass. I knew I could not refuse. If I refused, he might snap. He might hurt Keisha. He might try something physical right here in the kitchen. I needed to buy time. I needed to get him out of the house. I picked up the pen. Okay, I said, my voice wavering. If it helps. If it is for Keisha. Good. Blake breathed. He practically pushed the document under my hand. Sign right there, at the bottom. Where the X is. I adjusted my glasses. I leaned over the paper. I let the tip of the pen hover over the signature line. Blake was leaning in so close I could feel the heat of his body. He was watching the ink like a hawk watches a field mouse. My hand trembled violently. I made a mark. Then I stopped. I cannot see it well, I complained. The letters are too small. Just sign your name, Elijah. Blake shouted. Keisha jumped. Blake, stop yelling at him, she cried. I am sorry, Blake said, running a hand through his hair. I am just stressed. Dad, please, just write your name. I looked at him. I looked deep into his eyes. I wanted him to remember this moment. I wanted him to remember that he stood over a black man who had built bridges and tunnels, a man who had patents in his name and treated him like a child. I lowered the pen again. I summoned every ounce of focus I had. I needed to execute this perfectly. I needed to sign a name that looked like a signature but was definitely not mine. I needed a name that mocked him, a name that represented soul strength and everything Blake was not. I thought of the old vinyl records I used to play for Keisha when she was a baby. I thought of the King of Soul. I put the pen to the paper. I let my hand loop and swirl in a messy, jagged scrawl. O-T-I-S. I wrote the first name. It looked like a legitimate old man's scrawl. R-E-D-D-I-N-G. I finished the signature. Otis Redding. I lifted the pen. There I said, sounding exhausted. Is that good? Blake did not even read it. He did not look at the letters. He only saw ink on the line. He only saw salvation. He snatched the paper from the table so fast he almost tore it. Yes, he said, his voice breathless with triumph. Yes, that is perfect. He grabbed his car keys from the counter. I have to go, he said. I have to get this notarized and filed before the office closes at noon. But it is Saturday, Keisha said, wiping her eyes. The insurance office is closed. I have a private contact. Blake lied already, backing toward the door. A special agent. He agreed to meet me. Do not worry about anything. I will handle it. He looked at me one last time. It was a look of pure victory. He thought he had won. He thought he owned me. Rest up, Elijah, he said with a smirk. You look tired. He turned and ran out the door. I heard the BMW start in the driveway. I heard the tires screech as he peeled out, racing toward the bank, racing toward the notary, racing toward his freedom. He did not know he was racing toward a brick wall. I sat there at the table. Keisha was still crying softly. She felt guilty. She felt like she had betrayed me even though she thought she was saving me. I reached out and patted her hand. It is okay, baby girl, I said. Everything is going to be okay. She looked at me, her eyes full of sorrow. I am sorry, Daddy, she whispered. I just want you to be safe. I know, I said. I stood up. I walked to the window and watched the empty street where Blake had vanished. He was going to drive to his friend, the shady notary he likely used for his bad real estate deals. He would present the document with a flourish. He would demand the stamp. And then the notary would look at the signature. He would look at the name of the principal, Elijah Jefferson, and he would look at the signature, Otis Redding. He would ask Blake who Otis Redding was. Blake would look. He would squint, and the realization would hit him like a wrecking ball. He would realize that the senile old man had played him. He would realize that he had wasted his morning, his gas, and his last shred of hope. He would realize that he could not come back and make me sign again because that would admit that he hadn't checked. It would admit that I was lucid enough to prank him. He would be stuck in traffic. He would be stuck in a lie, and the clock on his debt would keep ticking. I turned away from the window. I am going to take a nap, I told Keisha. I walked to my room. I did not take a nap. I took out my burner phone. I sent a text to Sarah. He has the document. He is on his way to find out he is the fool of the dock of the bay. Be ready for the fallout tonight. I lay down on my bed and laced my fingers behind my head. I hummed a little tune. Sittin' in the mornin' sun. Blake Henderson was about to have a very, very bad day. And when he came back, he would not be coming back as a son-in-law. He would be coming back as a monster who had been unmasked. Tonight he would break. Tonight he would try the safe. And tonight I would be waiting. The headlights of the BMW swept across my bedroom ceiling like the searchlights of a prison guard tower. It was 11 at night. I had been lying in the dark for 3 hours waiting for this exact moment. I heard the car door slam outside. It was not a normal close. It was a violent impact of metal against metal that shook the window panes. Blake was back, and he knew. He knew that Otis Redding was a dead soul singer and not the name of his father-in-law. He knew he had walked into a notary office and made a complete fool of himself. He knew he had wasted his entire day chasing a ghost while the clock on his life ticked down. I heard the front door crash open downstairs. There were no hushed whispers tonight. There was no creeping. There was only the heavy, stomping bootfalls of a man who had lost his mind. I sat up in bed. I adjusted my robe. I moved to the armchair in the corner of the room, the one shrouded in the deepest shadow. I sat down and waited. He came up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I could hear his breathing. It was ragged, wet, and furious. He was muttering to himself a stream of profanity that grew louder as he approached my door. The door flew open. It hit the wall with a crack that splintered the plaster. Blake stood in the doorway. He looked like a man who had been through a war and lost. His suit was rumpled. His tie was undone. His hair was wild. In his right hand, he gripped a tire iron. It was a long, rusted piece of steel he must have pulled from his trunk. He scanned the room. He saw the empty bed. He did not see me in the corner. He did not care about me. He cared about the closet. He knew about the safe. I had made sure he knew. For weeks I had left the closet door slightly ajar when I knew he was watching. I had pretended to hide things there. I had created a legend of a hidden fortune, a hoard of cash that the crazy old man kept because he did not trust banks. To a desperate man, a rumor is as good as a fact. He marched into the room. He did not check to see if I was there. He went straight for the closet. He ripped the door open, tearing it off its top hinge. There it was, the black steel box, sitting on the floor. To him, it looked like salvation. To him, it looked like $200,000 in cash. He dropped to his knees. He did not try the keypad. He did not try the lock. He raised the tire iron high above his head and brought it down with a primal scream. The sound of steel striking steel was deafening in the small room. It rang like a church bell from hell. Clang. He hit it again and again. He was not trying to pick the lock. He was trying to murder the box. He was taking out every ounce of his frustration, his fear of Vinny, his hatred of me on that metal cube. He was grunting with every blow. Sweat was flying from his face. He wedged the flat end of the tire iron into the gap between the door and the frame. He hauled back on it with his entire body weight. His face turned purple. The veins in his neck bulged like ropes. "Open," he screamed. "Open, you piece of junk!" He was like an animal, a rabid dog digging for a bone. The veneer of the civilized real estate agent was gone. The mask of the loving husband was gone. This was the real Blake Henderson. A violent, greedy, stupid man with a crowbar. I watched him. I felt no fear. I felt only a cold, clinical detachment. I was an engineer watching a stress test. I was watching a structure fail under load. He readjusted his grip. He put his foot against the wall for leverage. He pulled until I thought his arms would snap. There was a screech of tearing metal. The locking bolts groaned. The hinges shrieked. With a final explosive pop, the door of the safe gave way. It swung open, bent, and broken. Blake fell back onto the floor, gasping for air, the tire iron clattering out of his hand. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees. He looked inside. He was expecting stacks of $100 bills. He was expecting gold coins. He was expecting his future. He froze. The silence that filled the room was absolute. It was heavier than the noise had been. There was no money. There was no gold. Inside the safe, illuminated by the soft, ghostly blue light of its screen, was an iPad Pro. It was propped up on a stand facing outward. The camera lens was staring directly at Blake. On the screen, Blake saw himself. He saw his sweaty red face. He saw the terror in his eyes. He saw the wreckage of the safe door. And in the corner of the screen, there was a small red icon that pulsed. Live. He was being broadcast. The video feed was going directly to a secure cloud server, and a copy was being routed to the private email of Detective Johnson at the precinct, just as Sarah had arranged. But that was not all. Next to the iPad sat a single thick manila folder. It was pristine. It looked out of place in the jagged wreckage of the safe. Blake reached out with a trembling hand. He did not want to touch it, but he had to. He pulled the folder out. He opened it. The light from the iPad screen illuminated the bold black text on the first page. Assignment of debt agreement. Blake blinked. He wiped sweat from his eyes. He read it again. Original creditor Vincent Santoro, debtor Blake Henderson. Principal amount $200,000. Assignee Elijah Jefferson. His breath hitched. He made a sound like a dying engine. He turned the page. He saw the transfer receipt. He saw the signature of Vinny the butcher signing away the right to break Blake's legs for a cash settlement of $100,000. He saw my signature at the bottom, the new holder of the note. He stared at the paper. His brain could not process it. The senile old man, the monkey, the burden. I owned him. I owned his debt. I owned his life. He dropped the folder. It spilled open on the floor. He looked at the empty safe. He looked at the iPad recording his humiliation. He slowly turned his head. He looked into the dark corner of the room where I sat. I leaned forward. The light from the hallway caught the lenses of my glasses. "Hello, debtor," I said. My voice was low. It was steady. It was the voice of the man who held the mortgage on his soul. Blake scrambled back, crab-walking away from me until his back hit the wall. He looked at me with a horror that transcended fear. He wasn't looking at a father-in-law anymore. He was looking at a monster who had been hiding in plain sight. "You," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "Me." I stood up. I walked toward him. He cowered. He pulled his knees to his chest. "You thought I was sleeping." "Blake," I said, looking down at him. "You thought I was weak. You thought you could take my house, my dignity, and my life." I picked up the folder from the floor. I dusted it off. "Vinny sold you to me," I said. "He was very happy to get 50 cents on the dollar. He said you were a bad investment." Blake began to cry. It was a pathetic whimpering sound. "Please," he sobbed. "Please, Dad, I did not know. You did not know," I repeated. "No, you did not." I tossed the folder onto his lap. "Get up," I said. He looked at me confused. "Get up," I commanded. My voice cracked like a whip. He scrambled to his feet using the wall for support. He was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. "The interest rate is compounding, Blake," I said. "And the first payment is due right now." He looked at the door thinking about running. "Do not run," I said. "You cannot run from your banker, and you cannot run from the police." I pointed to the iPad. "They just watched you break into a safe with a crowbar," I said. "Attempted robbery, destruction of property, and since I am over 65, that is a felony enhancement." Blake slid down the wall again. He buried his face in his hands. "What do you want?" he wailed. I looked at him. I looked at the wreckage of my closet. "I want you to go downstairs," I said. "I want you to sit at the kitchen table. And I want you to wait for Keisha to wake up." I leaned in close to his face. "And when she walks into that kitchen," I said, "you are going to tell her the truth. Every single word of it. Or I send this video to the district attorney and I call Vinny to tell him the deal is off and he can come collect his pound of flesh after all." Blake nodded frantically. I will tell her." "Good," I said. I stepped back. "Get out of my room," I said. He ran. He grabbed the folder and ran out of the room like the devil was snapping at his heels. I stood in the silence of the bedroom. I looked at the broken safe. It was a mess, but it was a beautiful mess. I walked over to the iPad and stopped the recording. I saved the file. Phase 3 was complete. The trap had snapped shut. The rat was caught. Now came the hardest part. Now came the part where I had to break my daughter's heart to save her life. I walked to the window and looked out at the night. The stars were cold and bright. "I am sorry, Keisha," I whispered, "but you need to see him for what he is." I turned off the light and walked out into the hallway to collect my debt. Blake ran until his legs gave out. He collapsed in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the shadows of the furniture he had already mentally sold. He was hyperventilating, his breath coming in short, jagged gasps that sounded like tearing paper. I walked down the stairs slowly, the manila folder tucked securely under my arm. I watched him unravel. It was not a pretty sight. It was like watching a building collapse after the load-bearing walls had been removed. He looked up at me as I reached the bottom step. His face was a mask of snot and tears. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was a terrified boy who had played a man's game and lost everything. "Dad," he choked out, crawling toward me on his hands and knees. "Please, you have to help me. Vinny, he is an animal. He told me he would use a belt sander on my knees. You cannot let him do that to me. I am family." I stopped just out of his reach. I looked down at him with the cold indifference of a judge passing a mandatory sentence. "You were family when you poured oil on my stairs, Blake," I said. "You were family when you tried to certify me insane. You were family when you broke into my safe with a tire iron." I tapped the folder against my leg. "I am not your family anymore," I continued. "I am your creditor. And creditors do not care about tears. They care about assets and liabilities. And right now, you are a liability." Blake's expression changed. The begging vanished, replaced by a sudden feral snap of realization. He looked at the folder, then he looked at me. He was 30 years younger than me. He was heavier. He was desperate. And he realized that if I were dead, the debt would become part of my estate. It would get lost in probate. Or maybe, just maybe, the folder would disappear before anyone else saw it. He stood up. The transformation was instant. The weeping coward became a cornered rat baring its teeth. "Give me the folder, Elijah," he said. His voice was low and dangerous. I did not move. I did not flinch. "No," I said. He lunged. It was a clumsy, violent tackle. He hit me in the chest, driving me back against the wall. The air left my lungs in a rush. His hands went for my throat. He was screaming a wordless roar of rage and panic. He squeezed. I felt his thumbs digging into my windpipe. I saw the red haze of murder in his eyes. I did not fight him. I did not try to pry his hands away. I did not try to punch him. I had spent 40 years calculating leverage and fulcrums. I knew that force met with force only created stress. Instead, I reached into my pocket. My fingers wrapped around the small black remote control I had kept there for 3 days. I pointed it at the 65-inch television mounted above the fireplace. I pressed the power button. The screen flared to life. The sudden burst of light filled the room, distracting Blake. His grip loosened just a fraction. He turned his head to look at the light. I pressed play. The video on the screen was crisp and high definition. It was black and white night vision footage. It showed the top of the staircase. It showed a man in boxers and a t-shirt crouching down. It showed Blake Henderson carefully pouring a bottle of olive oil onto the wood. It showed him testing the slickness with his finger. It showed him smiling. Blake froze. His hands fell away from my neck. He stumbled back, staring at the screen. The video changed. It was now the kitchen bathed in morning light. It showed Blake standing over a pot of oatmeal. It showed him pulling a small packet of white powder from his pocket. It showed him stirring it into the food. It showed him serving the bowl and placing it at my spot at the table. He watched himself poison me. He watched himself try to kill me. He backed away until his legs hit the coffee table. He sat down hard, his eyes glued to the evidence of his own monstrosity. I rubbed my throat. It would bruise. Good. More evidence. I walked over to the television and paused the video on a frame of his face as he poured the oil. The malice in his pixelated eyes was undeniable. "You thought I was senile?" I said, my voice raspy but firm. "You thought I was confused. You did not know that I installed those cameras the day after you moved in. Not because I suspected you then, but because I am a man who likes to know his perimeter is secure." Blake was shaking his head. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no. I recorded everything, Blake," I said. "I have footage of you searching my room. I have audio of you plotting with Keisha. I have video of you drugging my food with sleeping pills to make me groggy for the doctor." I stepped closer to him. "That is attempted murder," I said. 2 counts, plus elder abuse, plus fraud. I held up the folder. "And this is just the financial noose. The video is the trapdoor." Blake looked at me. He looked small. He looked broken. The fight had left him. He realized that he was not dealing with a victim. He was dealing with an architect who had designed his prison cell brick by brick. "Please," he whispered, "I do not want to go to jail." I looked at him with disgust. "You do not want to go to jail," I repeated. "You do not want Vinny to break your legs. You do not want to lose your reputation. It is always about what you want, isn't it, Blake?" I threw the folder onto the coffee table. It landed next to the remote. "I am going to give you a choice," I said. Blake looked up. Hope, pathetic and fragile, flickered in his eyes. "A choice?" "Yes," I said. "Option 1. I call the police right now. I show them this video. I show them the bruises on my neck. You go to prison for 20 years. And while you are in prison, I sell this debt back to Vinny for $1. He has friends on the inside, Blake. You won't last a week." Blake shuddered. He knew it was true. "Option 2, I said. I leaned down until I was eye level with him. "You confess." He blinked. "Confess." "You stay right here," I said. "You sit in that chair, and you wait for Keisha to wake up. And when she walks into this room, you tell her everything. You tell her about the gambling. You tell her about the debts. You tell her about the oil. You tell her about the pills. You tell her that you married her because you thought I was rich and dying." I pointed a finger at his face. "You break her heart, Blake. You shatter it into a million pieces. You make her hate you. You make her see you for the parasite you are. And then you pack your bags and you leave this house. You sign divorce papers giving her full custody of everything. And you disappear." "And the debt?" he asked, his voice trembling. "If you do all that I said, I will hold the debt. I will not collect. I will keep it in a safe place, as insurance. But if you ever come near my daughter again, if you ever try to contact her, if you ever miss a spousal support payment, I will sell the note to Vinny, and I will send the video to the cops." Blake stared at me. He looked at the folder. He looked at the TV screen where his own crime was paused in high definition. He knew it was the only way out. He knew it was the only way to survive. He nodded. Tears streamed down his face. "Okay," he whispered. "I will do it." I stood up straight. "You have 24 hours to be out of this house," I said. "But the confession happens this morning." I picked up the remote and turned off the TV. The screen went black, erasing his crime, but the memory of it hung in the air like smoke. I walked to the kitchen. I needed water. My throat felt like it had been crushed. Behind me, I heard Blake sobbing softly. He was mourning his life. He was mourning the easy future he thought he had stolen. I stood at the sink and looked out at the backyard. The sun was just starting to crest the horizon. It was going to be a beautiful day, but inside this house a storm was about to break. My daughter was about to wake up to a nightmare, and I had to be strong enough to hold her when her world fell apart. I drank the water. I washed the glass. I dried it. Then I went back to the living room and sat in the armchair opposite Blake. I crossed my legs. I folded my hands in my lap. "We wait," I said. And we waited. We waited for the sound of Keisha's footsteps. We waited for the end of her marriage. We waited for the truth to finally brutally set us all free. The sun rose on Sunday morning with a deceptive beauty that mocked the ugliness brewing inside my home. I sat in the armchair in the living room, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. I was dressed in a fresh shirt and slacks. I looked like a man ready for church. I was ready for a confession. I was ready for justice. I listened to the house wake up. I heard the shower running. I heard the coffee grinder. I heard Keisha walking into the kitchen, starting her day with the heaviness of a woman who carries the world on her shoulders. Then I heard Blake. He came out of the guest room downstairs. He walked into the hallway. He stopped when he saw me sitting there. The morning light hit his face. He looked haggard. His eyes were rimmed with red. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and blinked. He looked at the kitchen door. Then he looked at me. I nodded once. It was a silent command. "Go. Tell her." Blake took a deep breath. He straightened his spine. He walked toward the kitchen, but he stopped at the threshold. He turned his back to the kitchen door so Keisha could not see him. He looked at me one last time, and in that split second, the fear in his eyes vanished. It was replaced by something else, something manic, something reckless. He smiled. It was a bloody, broken smile. "Watch this, old man," he mouthed. He raised his right hand. He made a fist. He drew it back. and then with a force that made me flinch, he drove his own fist into his nose. The sound was a wet, sickening crunch of cartilage giving way. Blood exploded from his nostrils, splattering his white t-shirt. He did not stop. He clawed at his own face, scratching his cheek until it bled. He ripped the collar of his shirt. He threw himself against the wall with a thud that shook the pictures hanging there. Then he screamed. It was a scream of pure manufactured terror. "Help me, Keisha, help! He has lost his mind." He stumbled into the kitchen, crashing into the table. I heard chairs falling over. I heard the shattering of a ceramic mug hitting the floor. I sat frozen in my chair. For a moment, I could not process the sheer audacity of it. He had doubled down. He had taken the evidence of his own crimes and twisted it into a narrative of victimhood. He knew I had the video of the safe, but he also knew that in the heat of the moment, with blood pouring down his face, a video on an iPad upstairs might as well be on the moon. I stood up. My knees popped. I walked toward the kitchen. I did not run. An innocent man does not run. I reached the doorway. The scene before me was a tableau of chaos. Blake was on the floor, curled into a fetal position, holding his bleeding face. Blood was pooling on the linoleum. Keisha was kneeling beside him, her hands hovering over him, terrified to touch him. She was wearing her bathrobe. Her face was pale with shock. She looked up as I entered the room. Her eyes went from her bleeding husband to me. I was standing there calm, uninjured, watching them, with a cold detachment. "Daddy," she whispered. "He hit me," Blake screamed, his voice bubbling through the blood. "He was waiting for me in the hall. He attacked me. He was raving about money. He said I owed him money. He did not know who I was, Keisha. He looked right at me, and he did not know me." He grabbed Keisha's hand, leaving a smear of red on her skin. "He is dangerous," Blake sobbed. "He is gone. The dementia has taken him. He tried to kill me." I looked at my daughter. I saw the gears turning in her mind. She saw the blood. She saw the fear. She remembered the lost watch. She remembered the open gas stove. She remembered the doctor visit. The narrative Blake had been building for weeks snapped into place. It was a perfect, horrifying picture. "Keisha," I said calmly. My voice was steady. "Look at me." She looked at me, but she did not see her father. She did not see the man who had braided her hair and taught her to ride a bike. She saw a threat. She saw a violent, confused old man who had just assaulted the love of her life. "Stay back," she screamed. She stood up, putting herself between me and Blake. She spread her arms wide, shielding the monster on the floor. "Daddy, stop," she cried. "Just stop. Look at what you did." "I did not touch him, Keisha," I said. "He did this to himself. He is lying to you. He owes money to bad people. He is trying to manipulate you." Blake let out a low moan from the floor. "See," Blake whimpered. "Paranoia. Delusions. He thinks I am stealing from him. He thinks I am trying to hurt him. Oh God, my nose, I think it is broken." Keisha turned to check on him, then whipped her head back to me. Her face was twisted in anger and heartbreak. "How can you say that?" she yelled. "Look at him. He is bleeding. Why would he do this to himself?" "You are sick, Daddy. You are sick and you need help, and we tried to be gentle, but you just hurt him." I took a step forward. I reached into my pocket to pull out the phone, to show her the video, to play the audio. "Do not come any closer," she shrieked. She grabbed a heavy cast iron skillet from the drying rack. She held it up like a weapon. My daughter was threatening me with a frying pan in my own kitchen. "Keisha, listen to me," I said, keeping my hands visible. "I have proof. I do not want your proof," she shouted. "I do not want your crazy theories. You attacked my husband. You could have killed him. I am done, Daddy. I am done making excuses for you. I am done pretending everything is okay." She was crying now, huge, racking sobs that shook her body. "You are going to leave this house," she said, "right now." I looked at her. I saw the absolute conviction in her eyes. She had chosen. It was the moment every parent dreads, the moment when the child rejects the parent, not out of teenage rebellion, but out of adult judgment. She believed I was a monster, and she chose to protect the real monster because he wore a mask of love. I felt something break in my chest. It was not a bone. It was the last tether of hope I had held on to, that I could save her without destroying her world. Now I realized her world had to be destroyed for her to be saved. "You are making a mistake, Keisha," I said softly. "A terrible mistake." "No," she said, her voice hardening. "The mistake was letting you stay here this long. The mistake was thinking I could handle you." She reached for the wall phone with her free hand, never taking her eyes off me. She dialed 3 numbers. 911. My heart stopped for a second. She was actually doing it. She was calling the police on her own father. "Yes," she said into the receiver, her voice trembling. "I need police and an ambulance. My father has dementia. He just attacked my husband. He is violent. Yes, there is blood. Please hurry. He is still in the room." She hung up the phone. She looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "They are coming," she said. "They are going to take you away. And I am going to sign the papers, Daddy. I am going to sign whatever papers I have to sign to keep you locked up where you cannot hurt anyone ever again." Blake groaned from the floor. I looked down at him. He peeked through his bloody fingers. His eyes met mine. He winked. It was a small, quick movement, a flicker of triumph. He had won. He had turned my daughter into his weapon. He had used her love and her fear to evict me from my own life. I looked back at Keisha. She was trembling, still holding the skillet. She looked terrified of me. I realized then that there was nothing I could say. Words had no power here. Truth had no power here. Not yet. The poison had set in too deep. I nodded slowly. "Okay, Keisha," I said. I lowered my hands. I stepped back. "If that is what you want," I said, "call them. Let them come." I turned around. I walked out of the kitchen. "Where are you going?" she screamed after me. "Do not you dare run away. The police are coming." I did not answer. I walked into the living room. I walked to the front door. I opened it and stepped out onto the porch. The morning air was crisp. The birds were singing. The neighborhood was quiet, unaware of the tragedy unfolding behind my closed door. I sat down on the porch swing. I listened for the sirens. They were faint in the distance, but getting closer. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my burner phone. My hands were steady. My heart was cold. I dialed Sarah Jenkins. She answered on the first ring. "Elijah," she asked. "Is it done?" "Not the way we planned," I said. He flipped the script. He beat himself up. He convinced Keisha I attacked him. She called the cops. They are on their way to arrest me or commit me. There was a moment of silence on the line. Then Sarah spoke. Her voice was sharp, professional, dangerous. "Do you have the evidence secure?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "The video is in the cloud. The audio is on this phone." "Good," Sarah said. "Stay put. Do not resist arrest. Do not say a word to the police except that you want your lawyer." "I am not going to jail, Sarah," I said. "And I am not going to a psych ward." "You won't," she promised. "I am mobilizing the team. We will meet you at the precinct." "But, Elijah." "Yes. This changes the timeline," she said. "We cannot play with them anymore. We have to drop the hammer." I looked at the door of my house. I thought about Keisha standing in the kitchen protecting the man who was stealing her future. "Activate the destruction protocol," I said. I heard the sound of keys typing furiously on the other end of the line. "Protocol activated," Sarah said. "By noon today, Blake Henderson will wish he had died on those stairs." I hung up the phone. I put it back in my pocket. The sirens were loud now. A police cruiser turned the corner, its lights flashing blue and red against the morning sky. I sat on the swing and rocked gently back and forth. I watched them come. I was about to lose my freedom for a few hours, but Blake Henderson was about to lose everything forever. I closed my eyes and waited for the handcuffs. The game was over. The execution was about to begin. The police cruiser did not pull into the driveway. It stopped at the curb, its lights cutting through the morning haze like a warning beacon. 2 officers stepped out. They were young, their faces set in masks of professional indifference. Behind them, a gray sedan parked, and a woman in a beige coat emerged. She carried a clipboard and wore the weary expression of a social worker who had seen too many broken families and just wanted to get through the paperwork. I remained seated on the porch swing. I did not stand up. I did not run. I rocked gently back and forth, the rhythmic creak of the chain, the only sound I allowed myself to make. Neighbors were starting to gather. Mrs. Gable from across the street was peering through her blinds. Mr. Henderson, no relation to Blake, was standing by his mailbox pretending to check for mail on a Sunday. They were watching the spectacle. They were watching the downfall of Elijah Jefferson. The officers walked up the path. Their hands rested near their belts, not on their weapons but ready. They saw an old black man on a porch, and they saw a potential threat. That was the narrative Blake had spun. Violent, demented, dangerous, Mr. Jefferson, the taller officer, said. He stayed at the bottom of the steps. We received a call about a domestic disturbance. We need you to stand up and come with us. I stopped rocking. I looked at him. I am sitting on my own porch. Officer, I said calmly, is that a crime? The social worker stepped forward. Her voice was sickly sweet, the kind of tone used for unruly children or pets. Elijah, we are here to help you. Your daughter is very worried. She says you are confused. She says you hurt your son-in-law. We just want to take you somewhere safe where doctors can look at you. The front door opened behind me. Keisha stepped out. She was still wearing her robe, clutching the lapels tight against her chest. Her face was tear-stained, a portrait of the grieving, terrified daughter. And behind her, lurking in the shadow of the doorway like a gargoyle, was Blake. He had cleaned the blood off his face, but the swelling on his nose was real. He held a bag of ice to his cheek. He looked at me, and then he looked at the police. He caught my eye and smirked. It was a small, almost imperceptible twitch of his lips. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully weaponized the state against me. Officer, please, Blake called out, his voice trembling with fake fear. Be careful. He is strong. He snapped. He just snapped. The officer took a step up the stairs. He unclipped the retention strap on his baton. Sir, stand up. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. Do it now. This was it. The moment of total humiliation. The moment I was supposed to be dragged away in chains while my neighbors whispered and my enemies gloated. I stood up. I moved slowly. But I did not turn around. I looked past the officers. I looked down the street. Turn around, sir, the officer barked, reaching for my arm. Wait, I said. I was not talking to the officer. I was talking to the cavalcade that had just turned the corner. It was not one car. It was three. 3 black Cadillac Escalades with tinted windows moving in a tight formation that spoke of money and power. They did not slow down. They surged toward my house, their engines growling low and deep. The officers turned. The social worker took a step back. The neighbors stepped off the curb. The convoy screeched to a halt directly behind the police cruiser blocking the street. The doors flew open in unison. 4 men in dark suits stepped out. They were large. They were serious. They looked like they ate police officers for breakfast. They formed a perimeter. Then from the middle vehicle, Sarah Jenkins emerged. She did not look like a small-town lawyer today. She looked like a predator in a tailored Italian suit. Her heels clicked on the asphalt with the precision of a metronome. She carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a tablet in the other. She walked straight past the social worker. She walked straight past the police officers. She walked up the steps and stood beside me. Officer, step away from my client, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The officer blinked. Who are you? I am Sarah Jenkins, attorney at law representing Mr. Elijah Jefferson. And you are about to make a mistake that will cost this city millions in a civil rights lawsuit. Blake stepped out onto the porch. His smirk was gone. Who is this? He demanded. Officer, arrest him. He is dangerous. Sarah turned to look at Blake. She looked at him the way a boot looks at an insect. Mr. Henderson, she said, I suggest you remain silent. You have already incriminated yourself enough for one lifetime. She turned back to the police. My client is not going anywhere, she stated, and he is certainly not going to a psychiatric facility based on the word of a man who is currently under federal investigation for fraud. Federal investigation? The officer asked, his hand dropping from my arm. Sarah opened her briefcase. She pulled out a document with a blue cover. It was stamped with the seal of the Superior Court. This is an emergency restraining order and a writ of possession granted by Judge Miller 10 minutes ago, Sarah announced. It orders the immediate removal of Blake Henderson and Keisha Henderson from this property. Blake laughed. It was a hysterical cracking sound. You cannot do that, he shouted. This is Keisha's house. He signed it over to her 10 years ago. We have the deed. Sarah smiled. It was a smile that showed teeth. He signed a deed. Yes, Sarah said, her voice projecting to the gathered crowd. A deed transferring the property to his daughter. But you failed to read the fine print, Mr. Henderson. Or perhaps you just did not understand it. She held up the document. The deed contains a life estate clause reserving the right for Mr. Jefferson to live here until his death. But more importantly, it contains a revocation clause for cause, specifically Article 4, Section 2. She paused for effect. If the grantee or any member of the grantee's household commits an act of physical, emotional, or financial abuse against the grantor, the transfer is immediately null and void and full ownership reverts to Mr. Jefferson. Keisha stepped forward. She looked pale. Abuse, she whispered. We never abused him. He attacked us. Sarah turned to the tablet in her hand. She tapped the screen. Officers, Sarah said. Before you arrest anyone, I think you should watch this. She handed the tablet to the tall officer. The video played. It was the footage from last night. The night vision was clear. It showed Blake pouring the oil. It showed him testing it. It showed him smiling. Then she swiped. The next video played. It was from this morning. It showed Blake standing in the hallway. It showed him punching himself in the face. It showed him clawing at his own skin. It showed him screaming for help when I was standing 10 feet away, motionless. The officer watched. His face went blank. Then it went hard. He looked up from the screen. He looked at Blake. The narrative had flipped. The victim was the villain. The senile old man was the victim. Jesus, the officer muttered. He handed the tablet to his partner. He unclipped his handcuffs. But he did not reach for me. He walked up the steps. He walked past me. He walked past Keisha. He grabbed Blake by the shoulder and spun him around. Hey, Blake screamed. What are you doing, Blake Henderson? You are under arrest, the officer said, slamming Blake against the siding of the house. For what? Blake yelled, his face pressed against the vinyl. Filing a false police report, the officer listed clicking the cuffs onto Blake's wrists. Assault, attempted bodily injury to an elderly person, and based on that video with the oil, attempted murder, Keisha screamed. No, you cannot take him. He did not mean it. Sarah stepped in front of Keisha. And you, Mrs. Henderson, Sarah said coldly, you are being evicted. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal effects and vacate the premises. If you are still here in 6 minutes, you will be arrested for trespassing. Keisha looked at Sarah, then she looked at me. She looked at her father. She saw the man she had called the police on. She saw the man she had been ready to lock away in a facility run by drug dealers. Daddy, she whispered. Her voice was small, broken. Why? Why did you do this? Why did you let him get arrested? We are family. I looked at my daughter. My heart felt like a stone in my chest. I wanted to hold her. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. But I could not. She had made her choice in the kitchen. She had picked up the skillet. She had dialed the numbers. I did not do anything, Keisha, I said. My voice was tired. I did not pour the oil. I did not punch myself in the face. I did not try to steal $200,000. I looked at Blake, who was being dragged down the stairs, kicking and screaming by the officers. I just protected myself, I said. Keisha began to sob. But where will we go? We have no money. We have nowhere to go. That is not my problem, I said. I turned my back on her. I walked over to Sarah. Thank you, I said quietly. Sarah nodded. It is not over, Elijah, but the house is yours. I watched the police shove Blake into the back of the cruiser. He was looking at me through the window. He was screaming something, but the glass muted his words. The social worker was getting back into her car, looking embarrassed. The neighbors were still watching, their mouths open. Keisha ran down the stairs, chasing the police car. She was alone. She was homeless. She was married to a felon. I stood on my porch. The wind blew through the trees. It was over. The trap had worked. But as I watched my daughter weeping on the sidewalk, I did not feel like a winner. I felt like a survivor standing in the wreckage of a collapsed building. I had saved my life. I had saved my fortune. But I had lost my child. Sarah touched my arm. Go inside, Elijah, she said. It is done. I nodded. I turned and walked back into my house. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I was safe. I was alone. And the house was finally completely mine again. The fluorescent lights of the police precinct hummed with a low electrical buzz that sounded like a headache waiting to happen. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the observation room, watching through the one-way glass as my son-in-law destroyed the last remnants of his humanity. Blake Henderson was handcuffed to a metal table. He was no longer the arrogant man who had strutted through my kitchen. He was a weeping, broken creature desperate to salvage a shred of his future, even if it meant burning everyone else to the ground. Detective Johnson sat across from him, his face impassive. He placed a photo on the table. It was a still frame from the video of the oil on the stairs. Blake flinched as if the photo had burned him. "It was not just me," Blake blubbered, his voice cracking. "You have to believe me. I could not have done all this alone. Keisha knew. She knew everything." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I had expected him to lie. I had expected him to deny. But I had not expected him to throw his wife, the woman he claimed to love, directly into the fire to save his own skin. "She knew about the money problems," Blake continued, words tumbling out of his mouth in a frantic stream. "She knew we were underwater. She signed the papers for the second mortgage. She knew I was trying to get power of attorney. She helped me look for the will. She wanted the money just as much as I did." The detective leaned forward. "Did she know about the oil? Did she know about the poison?" Blake hesitated. I saw the gears turning in his desperate mind. He knew that if he admitted he acted alone on the murder attempts, he would take the full fall. If he implicated her, it became a conspiracy. It muddied the waters. She knew we had to get rid of him. Blake lied. His eyes were wide and wet. We talked about it. She said she could not wait for him to die naturally. She said she wanted her inheritance while she was still young enough to enjoy it. She told me to do whatever it took. She gave me the green light. I closed my eyes. It was a lie. I knew my daughter. She was weak. She was easily manipulated. She was blind to his faults. But she was not a killer. She did not have the stomach for violence. But Blake did not care about truth anymore. He only cared about leverage. He was dragging her down into the mud with him, hoping that two defendants might get a better deal than one. Detective Johnson looked at the glass. He knew I was watching. He stood up and left the interrogation room. A moment later, he opened the door to where I was sitting. "He is giving us everything," Mr. Jefferson Johnson said quietly. "He is confessing to the fraud, the theft, and the attempted murder, but he is pinning the motive and the authorization on your daughter. He claims she was the mastermind." I looked through the glass at Blake. He was sobbing into his hands. "He is lying," I said. "Keisha is many things, but she is not a murderer. It does not matter what I believe," Johnson said. "It matters what a jury believes." And right now he is painting a very convincing picture of a husband doing his wife's bidding. We have to question her. We have to treat her as a suspect in the conspiracy to commit fraud. She signed documents, Elijah. Her name is on the fraudulent loan applications. She benefited from the stolen money. Ignorance is not a legal defense for fraud. I nodded. I knew the law. I knew that Sarah Jenkins had warned me about this. Keisha was legally entangled in his web. "Can I see her?" I asked. "She is in holding cell B," Johnson said. "She has been processed. She is scared. You have 10 minutes before her lawyer arrives, if she has one." "She does not," I said. "Blake spent all their money on a forger." I stood up. My legs felt heavy. This was the hardest walk I would ever have to take. Harder than the walk to the cliff. Harder than the walk to the cemetery to bury my wife. I was walking to see the wreckage of my daughter's life. The holding cell was cold. It smelled of industrial cleaner and unwashed bodies. Keisha was sitting on a metal bench, her knees pulled up to her chest. She was still wearing her bathrobe, now stained with grime from the police car. She looked up when the heavy door buzzed open. When she saw me, she scrambled off the bench. She ran to the bars. "Daddy," she cried. Her voice was raw. "Daddy, get me out of here. Please. This is a mistake. I did not do anything. They are treating me like a criminal. They took my fingerprints. They took my picture." I stood on the other side of the bars. I did not reach out to hold her hand. I kept my hands in my pockets. I needed to be strong. I needed to be the steel beam that does not bend. "Blake is talking, Keisha," I said softly. "He is in the other room. He is telling them that you planned everything. He is telling them that you wanted me dead so you could get the money." Keisha recoiled as if I had slapped her. "What? No, that is a lie. I love him." "Why would he say that? Because he is a rat," I said. "And when a rat is trapped, it bites. He is trying to reduce his sentence by blaming you." She shook her head violently. Tears sprayed from her eyes. "I did not know, Daddy. I swear. I did not know about the oil. I did not know about the pills. I thought he just wanted to put you in a home. I thought he was trying to protect us." I looked at her. I looked deep into her eyes, searching for the little girl I had raised. "You thought he was trying to protect us," I repeated. "Yes," she sobbed. "He said you were sick. He said you were dangerous." I took a step closer to the bars. My voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. Let me ask you something, Keisha, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. She stopped crying. She sniffled and looked at me. When your mother's watch went missing, I said, Blake told you I lost it. He told you I was confused. Did you ever ask me? Did you ever look for it? Or did you just believe him? She looked down at the floor. I believed him, she whispered. And when he told you I left the stove on, I continued. Did you check the knob? Did you check for fingerprints? Or did you just accept that your father, who spent 40 years working with high-pressure gas lines, suddenly forgot how to turn off a burner? She did not answer. She gripped the bars tighter. And the stairs. Keisha, I said, my voice hardening. When he told you I fell, when he told you I was clumsy, did you ever walk up those stairs and look at the wood? Did you ever touch the step to see why your father, who has never lost his balance in his life, suddenly went tumbling down? She squeezed her eyes shut. No, she whimpered. Why, I asked. Why didn't you look? Because I trusted him, she screamed. Because he is my husband and I am your father, I shouted back. The sound echoed off the concrete walls. I am the man who raised you. I am the man who held you when you cried. I am the man who sacrificed everything to give you this house. And you trusted a stranger over me. You watched him treat me like a dog. You watched him humiliate me. You watched him strip away my dignity piece by piece. And you said nothing. I took a breath. I lowered my voice. Silence is a choice, Keisha. Looking the other way is a choice. You did not pour the oil. You did not crush the pills. But you held the door open for the man who did. You let him into our sanctuary. And when I tried to warn you, when I tried to show you the truth, you picked up a frying pan and threatened to hit me. She sank to her knees on the dirty floor. She buried her face in her hands. I am sorry, she wailed. I am so sorry. I was stupid. I was blind. Please, Daddy. Please just pay the bail. I want to go home. I want to start over. I will make it up to you. I promise. I looked down at her. My heart was breaking, shattering into dust. I wanted to open that door. I wanted to take her home and make her soup and tell her it was just a bad dream. But I knew that if I did that, she would never learn. If I saved her now, she would never understand the cost of her betrayal. She would always be the victim. She would never be the survivor. She needed to feel the cold. She needed to feel the weight of her choices. I cannot do that, Keisha, I said. She looked up. Her face was streaked with grime and tears. What, I am not posting your bail, I said. Her mouth fell open. Daddy, you need to stay here, I said. You need to sit in this cell. You need to look at these walls, and you need to think about what you did. You need to think about the fact that you were ready to sign a paper to lock me away in a facility run by criminals just so you could keep your comfortable life. But I will go to jail, she cried. It is dangerous in here. It was dangerous in my house too, I said. It was dangerous for me, and you did not care. I turned away from the bars. I will hire a lawyer for you, I said. Sarah Jenkins will represent you. She will make sure Blake does not pin the murder attempt on you. She will prove you were ignorant of the violence. But you are going to face the fraud charges, Keisha. You signed those loan applications. You spent that money. You are going to answer for that. Daddy, no, do not leave me. I walked to the door. I banged on it for the guard. Goodbye, Keisha, I said. I stepped out into the hallway and the heavy steel door slammed shut, cutting off her screams. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. A single tear rolled down my cheek. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew it was the only way to save her soul. I walked back to the front desk. Detective Johnson was waiting for me. Are you okay? He asked. No, I said, but I will be. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the manila folder. The folder that contained the assignment of debt. The folder that held Blake Henderson's life. I handed it to the detective. What is this? Johnson asked. This is leverage, I said. But I do not need it anymore. Blake is going to prison. He is the state's problem now. Actually, I said, pausing, I have a better idea. I took the folder back. Does Blake have access to mail in county jail? I asked. Yes, Johnson said. Once he is processed. Good, I said. I took out a pen. On the front of the folder, I wrote a name and an address. Vincent Santoro, the meat market, West End. I handed the folder back to the detective. Do me a favor, I said. Put this in the outgoing mail for me. Johnson looked at the address. He looked at me. He knew who Vinny was. He knew what this meant. This puts a target on his back, Elijah Johnson said. If Vinny knows Blake is in lockup, he will send someone. Prison isn't safe from guys like Santoro. I know, I said. I adjusted my glasses. Blake liked to gamble, I said. He liked high stakes. He bet his life against mine. I turned toward the exit. He lost, I said. Now he has to pay the bookie. I walked out of the police station and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the afternoon. I was alone. My house was empty. My family was gone. But as I walked down the steps, I did not feel empty. I felt heavy. Heavy with the weight of the truth. Heavy with the burden of justice. I hailed a cab. Take me home, I said. I had a house to clean. I had a life to rebuild. And I had a foundation to pour one that would never, ever crack again. 6 months had passed since the sirens faded from my street. The seasons had turned from the wet chill of spring to the crisp burn of autumn. The leaves on the oak trees in the cemetery were a brilliant fiery red. They fell slowly, covering the grass in a quilt of dying color. I stood in front of the granite headstone. It was cold to the touch. The name chiseled into the stone was Beatrice Jefferson, my wife, my partner, the only person who had ever truly known me. I did not bring flowers today. Flowers die. I brought a copy of a closing statement from the bank. I folded it and placed it under a small rock at the base of the stone. I sold the house, Bea, I said aloud. The wind carried my words away. It was time. It was not a home anymore. It was a crime scene. It was a museum of betrayals. I did not cry. I had shed my last tear in the police station when I walked away from Keisha's cell. Now I felt only a quiet, hollow clarity. The sale had closed yesterday. A young couple bought it. They were architects. They talked about opening up the floor plan and letting in more light. I told them to tear down the staircase first. They laughed. They thought I was joking. I was not. I stood there for a long time listening to the silence. For 40 years I had defined myself as a provider. I built the house to provide shelter. I saved money to provide security. I raised a daughter to provide a future. And in the end, that provision had been the poison. I had given too much and they had taken it for granted. I had sheltered them from the rain so effectively that they forgot how to build their own roofs. I adjusted my coat. It was a new coat. Cashmere. Expensive. I was done hiding my wealth. I was done pretending to be the poor retired laborer. It is done. B, I whispered. The accounts are settled. I turned away from the grave and walked back to the waiting car. It was not a taxi. It was a town car with a driver. I sat in the back seat and looked out the window as we drove away from the dead and back toward the living. But the living were suffering, and I watched their suffering with the dispassionate eye of a man who knows the price of justice. The driver took the long way back to the city center. We passed the county correctional facility. It was a sprawling complex of gray concrete and razor wire. Somewhere inside that fortress, Blake Henderson was living a nightmare that never ended. Sarah Jenkins kept me updated. She had friends in the district attorney's office. She told me that Blake had tried to plead guilty to lesser charges, but the video evidence was too damning. The jury had not been sympathetic to a man who poisoned oatmeal and greased stairs. He was sentenced to 15 years. But the sentence was the easy part. The hard part was the mail. Detective Johnson had mailed the folder to Vinny, and Vinny, true to his reputation, had not forgotten. Blake had been in general population for less than a week when the first accident happened. He slipped in the shower. 2 broken ribs and a fractured orbital socket. A week later, he fell down a flight of metal stairs. A broken wrist. He requested protective custody. He was denied. He was trapped in a cage with men who owed favors to the man he owed money to. Every time he closed his eyes, he had to wonder if he would wake up. He had lost 50 pounds. His hair was falling out from stress. He was a ghost haunting his own body. He was living in the hell he had tried to create for me. We drove past the prison and headed into the working-class district on the east side. The car slowed down as we passed a diner called the Rusty Spoon. It was a greasy spoon joint with flickering neon signs and a parking lot full of trucks. I looked through the tinted glass. I saw her. Keisha was wiping down a table near the window. She was wearing a stained pink uniform that was too tight. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired. She looked older than her 30 years. She had avoided prison time. Sarah had done her job well. She proved that Keisha was unaware of the attempted murder, but the fraud charges had stuck. She received 5 years of probation and a massive fine. She had to pay back the credit card companies. She had to pay back the bank, and she had to do it alone. The house was gone. The money was gone. Her nursing license was suspended pending a review of her ethics violation. She was starting over from zero. Actually, she was starting from below zero. She looked up as the black town car glided by. She could not see me through the tinted glass, but she paused. She held the rag in her hand and stared at the car. For a second, I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Maybe she felt my presence. Maybe she remembered the days when her father would have stopped the car and come in to save her. But the car did not stop. I signaled the driver to keep going. She needed this. She needed to feel the ache in her feet after a 10-hour shift. She needed to worry about making rent. She needed to understand that money is not magic paper that appears when you sign your father's name. It is sweat. It is time. It is life. If she survived this, if she clawed her way back up without shortcuts, maybe one day we could talk. But not today. Today she was learning the most valuable lesson I could ever teach her. We arrived at the city center. The car pulled up to a newly renovated office building. It was a beautiful structure, steel and glass rising from the pavement like a promise. A crowd had gathered outside. There were cameras, there were reporters, there was a red ribbon stretched across the entrance. Sarah Jenkins was waiting for me at the curb. She opened the car door. "Ready?" Elijah, she asked, smiling. I stepped out. The flashbulbs popped. I buttoned my jacket. I walked up the steps to the podium. I looked at the sign above the door. The Beatrice Jefferson Foundation. Legal aid and advocacy for the elderly. It was my new project. I had taken the patent royalties, the sale of the house, and the liquidation of the overseas assets, and I had poured it all into this. We were going to hire lawyers. We were going to hire investigators. We were going to hunt down every Blake Henderson in the city and drag them into the light. I stood at the microphone. The crowd went quiet. "Thank you all for coming," I said. My voice was strong. It did not sound like the voice of an old man. It sounded like the voice of an engineer. For a long time I lived in the shadows, I continued. I thought that silence was safety. I thought that if I kept my head down and provided for my family, I would be protected by love. I was wrong. I looked at the camera lens. I looked right into the glass eye that was broadcasting this image to thousands of screens. I imagined Blake watching from a prison TV. I imagined Keisha watching from the break room at the diner. Love without respect is just a transaction, I said. And when the currency is your dignity, the price is too high. I picked up the ceremonial scissors. They were heavy and gold. We built this foundation for the quiet ones, I said, for the grandmothers who are afraid to speak up because they do not want to cause trouble. For the grandfathers who sign papers they cannot read because they trust the hands that hold the pen. I cut the ribbon. It fell away, fluttering to the ground. The crowd cheered, but I did not smile. I leaned closer to the microphone. I looked straight at you. Yes, you. The one watching this screen. The one who thinks your parents are just resources waiting to be harvested. The one who thinks the elderly are sleeping while you plot in the next room. Do not underestimate a quiet man, I said, my voice dropping to a low rumble. We built the roads you drive on. We built the roofs over your heads. We know how the world works because we are the ones who made it work. I took off my glasses. I stared into the lens with eyes that had seen betrayal and survived it. We are not sleeping, I said. We are resting. And while we rest, we are watching. We see the greedy looks, we hear the whispers, and we know where the bodies are buried because we dug the holes. So go ahead. Open the drawer. Try the lock. But remember one thing, the house always wins. And this time, I am the house. I turned away from the podium and walked into the building. I had work to do. There were thousands of Blakes out there, and I had a lot of debt to collect. Hit like and subscribe if you know someone who needs to hear this. And never forget, the walls have ears, and the old man in the chair sees more than you think. This ordeal taught me that blood is never a justification for betrayal. True family is built on respect, not entitlement. For years, I confused enabling with loving shielding my daughter until she lost her moral compass. I learned that you cannot save someone who refuses to be saved, and you should never set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Your dignity has no price tag. If you are the quiet one in the room, remember, you are not weak, you are observing. And when the time comes to protect your legacy, do not hesitate to bring the house down. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to stand your ground against those who underestimated you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and resilience.